A year ago in the East Tower of Sifulco, a freestanding palace in the north. The girl woke up and was very surprised when she looked at herself in the mirror because she couldn't even recognize herself. And how could this have happened? A terminally ill tyrant fell in love with a sunflower. It was a love story between a bedridden prince and Annie, the protagonist of the novel. And this girl, in whom our heroine is now reincarnated, is Rosalind. She is one of the mentors of young Theodore, the main male character. When the girl woke up, she noticed that her eyes were very puffy, but that didn't surprise her one bit. After all, no mentor has ever endured all this before, and Rosalind is no exception. Cursed Prince, also a descendant of the devil. There was only one reason Theodore was called that. This guy is a prince of the empire who has not experienced an awakening, which is to say, the awakening is the most important part of the novel. It usually happens without complications, even in novice mages, but Theodore was an exception. The awakening of the imperial family was even more special. Unlike ordinary mages, they possess pure white mana, and according to legend, it has ancient power. It is an important privilege that separates the common people and the imperial bloodline. Members of such a family usually experience it at the age of 3 or 4. But for Theodore, the eldest son, unfortunately nothing happened, which means only one thing. In order to survive, Rosalind must awaken his powers. Of course, in the novel, everything was explained in detail how to pull this off, but you only have to count on Annie, who is the main character. In fact, this novel, which the girl is caught up in, is rated no younger than 17, so is also tragic. Awakening requires physical contact, which brings strong emotions behind it, and Theodore was able to feel this after his night with Annie. But in the end, he killed the heroine, even though he was just obsessed with her before. Because the awakening was so gusty, Theodore's mana was out of control, destroying both his mind and body. As a result, he went insane, embracing the dead body of his lover and dying from an explosion of his own mana. The girl, when she read it, was very shocked. She still could not believe that she had fallen into this very novel. In fact, she just wanted to own her own gym, working as a personal trainer and stand firm on her own feet. But it all turned into some kind of dream, and her dreams crumbled when she entered this world. Then she wondered what kind of girl this Rosalind was. As she checked her new black robe, she must have taken her first exciting step into the Mage Tower. Probably dreaming of becoming one of the enchantresses from the highest level, her heart kept trembling with joy, and the decision to send her to where she is now immediately dashed all her hopes, which is why she cried until her eyes were so swollen. At this point, Rosalind had the feeling that her eyes were only getting worse as she imagined it all. But she's going to survive, and as ridiculous as it is, her getting caught up in the novel shouldn't end badly. She can't in any way die. She worked so hard for the squeeze in that life, she doesn't want to lose her chance in this one as well. Rosalind thought she needed to learn about herself and her enemy in order to win this battle. And maybe think about Theodore in the meantime. Right now, he's most likely angry at the constant failures, and the Emperor is the root cause of it all. Frustrated by the failure, he hadn't spoken to Theodore since he was 4 years old. It amazed the girl that this idiot could still call himself a father. Not only that, a few years later, when the Empress died, he immediately remarried. And soon they had another child. He grew up and experienced an awakening like everyone else in their family. And Theodore was officially disqualified from inheriting the throne. Rosalind felt sorry for the boy, for it was not his fault. That's also how he was imprisoned in the palace of Sifulco when he became 10 years old, if she's not mistaken. But more importantly, everything looked exactly as described in the book. At that moment, she went to the window and began to look around. But then suddenly a strong wind blew, and the girl immediately froze, so she closed the window. She wondered how Theodore could have lived alone in such a cold place. The very first sentence of the novel stated that the lights in that tower had never been turned off for 9 years. Rosalind suggested that perhaps he kept the lights on all the time while studying the awakening. In order to get back to the capital before the coming-of-age ceremony, he had to make great efforts during all those 9 years without interruption. And it was all for one purpose, for the father to finally recognize his son. Awakening is literally the only way to end such a miserable life. The girl believes he was obsessed with the idea of awakening because of his despair, but he violently blamed his own mentors for his failures and killed them. She doesn't think the Tower of Mages wanted to lose their men like that, but they just couldn't avoid the prince's order. It was later found out that Theodore's physical condition was different, which was why the awakening didn't happen properly. At 19, when he went to the imperial palace for his coming-of-age ceremony, a blonde heroine appeared. Her name was Annie. She's a girl as warm as a summer sunflower which couldn't exist in cold, gloomy Shifoko. Theodore noticed his obsession, and Annie accepted his despair with kindness. He thought of her as a savior, and it ended with them spending the night together. Then Rosalind thought about these actions, and realized that either way, she would die even if she did what Annie did. Despite the plot of the erotic novel, the girl cannot just take and seduce him. Such is not on her part, certainly not. But Rosalind didn't know what to do now or how to survive in this world. At this point, she decided that she needed to freshen up first. So she walked over to a bowl where there was cold water and washed her face. The girl thought, surely there must be some way. She should take advantage of his unusual condition. But at that moment her musings were interrupted, for there was a knock at the door. She said at once that they could come in. The door opened and a guy with glasses appeared. He turned to the girl and asked if she had finished unpacking her things. He also added that His Highness the Prince wanted to see her. When Rosalind heard this, she realized that this was just the beginning. And after a while, the boy and the girl started walking towards the prince. They walked in complete silence. This guy's name was Anton. He's the steward of the Seafolk Palace. His role was practically reduced to that of a landlady. If he had not been there, living conditions would not have improved as much as they did under him. He is the servant who has looked after Theodore since he was a child and stayed with him when Theodore was banished. While Theodore imprisoned himself in the tower obsessing about the awakening, Anton took care of all the internal affairs of the palace. Perhaps that was why even the cruel Theodore could not treat him carelessly, for he had become like kin to him already. In short, it is Anton who is the true master of this palace, so the girl needs to win him over to her side. Rosalind is a helpless student without any connections to the outside world, which meant that if everything went down, there would be no one to even save her. The girl thought that it would be very good if Anton was on her side. And maybe she will still manage to survive, even in the worst-case scenario, and avoid her death. However, the problem is all about Anton because he is very stuffy. It is impossible to even have a normal conversation with him. He has served Theodore since he was a young boy. Anton witnesses many secret conspiracies, which makes it hard for him to trust others. Always keeps an impassive expression on his face and rarely expresses his emotions or does anyone a favor. Rosalind thought about the fact that if she tried to gain his trust without a plan, he might immediately suspect something. But she didn't know for sure what to do. The girl was about to go further, but then suddenly she crashed into Anton. She was very surprised and didn't understand why he suddenly stopped, then asked if he was okay. She even thought for a moment that he was crying, but Anton said in a nonchalant voice that it didn't matter, and then walked on. Rosalind thought about it then, looking at him, and realized that perhaps he had reacted that way because of the pain in his back. In fact, his slouching back gave the girl no comfort. The pain could be worse in such cold and wet weather as they were having outside. He most likely has this chronic condition, and it has been going on for more than a year. But at that moment, Rosalind stopped and remembered something. Then she grabbed him at once and told him to stop. Anton was just in shock, but he decided to obey because she started pressing on the sore spot on his back. Then the man said the muscle was extremely tight, that's all. In fact, people usually assume that back pain is caused by tense muscles, but that's not really true. The painful area and the location of the injury may not be the same in this situation. This muscle is located a little lower. A tense gluteal muscle is the cause of pain in the back, sacrum, and pelvis. And at that moment, the girl, having found the right point, pressed hard on it. Anton was immediately indignant. He turned to the girl and asked what she was doing, but Rosalind ignored his words and asked if he felt better. And at that moment, the man was suddenly very surprised. He actually realized that he felt better. Rosalind laughed in her head and wondered if he enjoyed the sports massage she'd been practicing her whole life. The gym patrons would come in just to have the girl give them a massage, and she was really good at it. Even some of her co-workers asked for massages, but that was not all. Rosalind quickly turned the man's back to her and asked that he tense his stomach, imagining that he was pulling the skin into his body. Anton was very surprised and asked what she was even talking about, but she insisted and told him to do it quickly. The man stared at her for a while, then still gave in to her pressure and began to tense his stomach. Rosalind decided to check on his tautness and help herself a little, but when she felt his stomach, she was very surprised. Because there was pure fat, no muscle at all. Of course, he doesn't have to work out, he's a butler, but he could still do a little abs. Then the girl wondered how she could resolve the situation, and after a while told him to now continue in the same way, but at the same time going up the stairs. Anton was no longer surprised by anything and did not contradict her, so he began to climb the stairs. Then Rosalind smiled and asked how he was. Wasn't it less painful now? But after thinking about it, Anton said that was right, and asked how she'd even managed it. Rosalind said that because his muscles are too weak to support his body, his back is under a lot of pressure. It might be a little uncomfortable now, but he would get used to it. And if it hurts too much, have him massage the area near his buttocks. Then the man thanked her and said he understood. And after that, Rosalind nodded and said that His Highness was already waiting, suggesting to hurry up so as not to anger him. At this point, the girl thought that it seemed to have been a success, at least. She even made a pretty good impression. After a while, they came to the door. Anton knocked and, addressing His Highness, said that the Tower of Mages had sent him a new tutor. Then a cold and rough voice came from behind the door and said they could come in. Anton immediately turned to the girl and told them to come in. And when they walked in, Rosalind immediately saw the novel's main male protagonist, Theodore Barbarossa. Throughout the many pages of the novel, not just describing but praising outright its beauty. He is an attractive man with black hair and just perfect skin, and he has unusual green and purple-colored eyes that convey a mystical atmosphere. Because this guy wasn't hiding in the shadows, the girl couldn't get a good look at him, and then thought that this incredible beauty she would soon see live. She just couldn't believe it. In fact, she was even a little agitated. She was trying to calm herself down somehow. But when Rosalind came closer to him, she was surprised. The girl didn't understand what was wrong with him. She saw that the boy had bony shoulders and a very hunched back. Theodore's body was haggard, and his thin legs were more like chopsticks. Rosalind thought she could knock him out with one punch without even trying. The girl was still in shock. She thought he could easily be carried away by the wind, and his face didn't look good. She began to look closely and noticed Theodore's cheeks were sunken and dry lips, and his hair was stiff and emaciated along with his skin. He must have been skipping meals for the sake of studying his waking, because Rosalind noticed he had a full basket of food beside him. The girl thought it was the worst body she'd seen in her entire career as a trainer. She now realized that all the novel said was that he was weak, for his life revolved around waking up. But now that she looked at the situation personally, she realized that it was a complete horror. It was a wonder to Rosalind how he could even sleep with Annie with such a horrible body. Yes, and no wonder the girl eventually exploded, because his body cannot cope with the heavy physical load. The girl doesn't understand how he can ruin his beautiful face like that. It makes her sick to her stomach." Then Theodore looked at her in surprise and asked if she was his new mentor who would help him awaken. The girl said that it was like that and gave her name, but the man sighed at that moment and said that it was another useless rookie. At this point, Rosalind thought it wasn't surprising, since he actually killed everyone indiscriminately. But Theodore became serious and looked her straight in the eye and said he would be brief, asking that she awaken his mana right then. Rosalind was very surprised that he was demanding it of her right now. After all, it took time to awaken. Even high-level mages couldn't make it happen at once. Not even Annie herself is capable of such a thing. The girl didn't say a word. Theodore had said then that if she couldn't, she would say so. And also Theodore added that he would hate to waste time, so she should just leave quietly. When the girl heard someone coming towards them, it was a guy. He was dressed all in black and had a sword on his belt. Rosalind realized that this was Theodore's silent assassin, and his name was Archibald. And she wondered if that was what he meant when he said she should leave quietly. The girl realized that now she has a new problem, but first she has to stop herself from being killed, because she can't just end everything without doing anything. Then Rosalind screamed and said that she could do it, and if he gave her a little more time, he would get what he wanted. Theodore snorted and wondered if she was really asking for his time. It was ridiculous. Why would he trust someone like her? Rosalind realized he wasn't going to listen to her, at which point she saw him nod to his assistant. Then Archibald immediately grabbed his sword and began to move closer to the girl. She realized she had to do something. And then I wondered what could awaken his mana. It didn't have to be something physical, anything that could activate it even a little bit. Rosalind realized that it could be a touch that evoked strong emotions, not necessarily that it was love. Theodore's mother was the only person who loved him as a child. She protected and cared for him when he was left behind by his oratorical family, including his own father. She was the only refuge for his soul. But after her death, the grown-up Theodore cried for days, refusing to eat or drink anything. At that moment, Rosalind ran over to the shelf where the photograph stood. It was the last thing she would ever want to do. She was sorry, but the girl simply had no other choice. She had to live. At that moment, she grabbed the picture of her mom and threw it on the floor. Theodore, as soon as he saw her grabbing the picture, immediately started yelling for her to stop and not do it, but the girl certainly didn't listen to him. But he can definitely not worry, because one day Theodore will bloom as beautifully as those sunflowers. He just has to believe in himself and do better. While Rosalind was thinking about all this, Theodore couldn't contain his anger and ran up to her. He grabbed her by the neck and began to choke her. He screamed at the girl, saying he would never forgive her, and swore she would die the most agonizing death possible. It would be more painful than any other, but then suddenly he felt strange. Theodore didn't realize what was going on. There was something strange in his heart. He had never felt like this before. And in that moment, he realized it was pure mana. He let go of the girl. Theodore was in shock. He still couldn't believe it was really happening. Well, then Rosalind spoke up and said that she did say she could do it. She just needs a little time, and this is just the beginning. She asked that he trust her, for she would be able to awaken his mana. Theodore was tired of having a hard time keeping himself on his feet, so Rosalind helped him and grabbed him just in time. At this moment, she thought that apparently his body was too exhausted. After all, he had even lost consciousness from activating such a small amount of his mana. Rosalind realized that he was more like a poor little animal cornered than the tyrant everyone thought him to be. Then she heard someone coming toward them. It was Archibald. He looked angrily at the girl. Rosalind was worried. She said he was fine, he'd just passed out because his mana had suddenly activated. Then Theodore's aide immediately hid his sword, and the girl felt better about it, and she thought that this time she had survived. After all that had happened, Archibald immediately grabbed his master and carried him to bed. Afterward, they wished him sweet dreams. And just like that, Rosalind officially became the prince's mentor to help him with his awakening. However, the class was postponed due to his poor condition, but the girl was still uneasy. Physically, he can't handle waking up, let alone constantly using mana. Rosalind thought about it then, and came to the decision that she should probably get him to practice, for starters. Strength training, running, swimming, yoga, Pilates, but he was too weak to do all that. The girl decided that she would have to tackle his eating and sleeping first, though it would be better to start by improving his home environment. After that, Rosalind went to her room. She wondered if they could move him to a sunny room so that he would be better off. Rosalind remembered that there was one very nice room. It was right next to the garden, and she wondered if they couldn't open a window. After all, a new apartment would have a positive effect on Theodore's health, but she doesn't know if Anton would agree to that. But when she was already approaching her room, she saw that someone was walking stubbornly near her. And when she came closer, she saw that it was Anton. The girl was shocked. She didn't understand why he had suddenly come and was waiting for her at the door. Stepping closer to him, Rosalind asked if there was anything she could do to help him. The guy said that actually in confidence, he'd like to ask one favor for himself. Rosalind listened carefully and agreed. They went into the room and she began to massage him. Anton, because he had never felt so good, even moaned from time to time. The girl then thought that it must be very good for him, since he couldn't even restrain his moans. Well, anyway, Anton came to her first, and the girl wondered if this wouldn't be the perfect opportunity for her plan. If she relied on her experience, she might be able to win the favor of the most powerful man in the palace, and maybe she would talk about repairing the window. However, Rosalind's hope lasted a very short time, and she soon ran into a problem. When the massage was finally finished, Rosalind said it was the easiest thing to do, and, as she said, he should watch his posture. Anton replied that he was trying very hard. However, his stomach was too sore to continue it. The girl replied that it was because he had no muscles, but he could solve this problem with strength training. Anton asked, "What else is strength training?" Then the girl said that you have to lift a certain amount of weight repeatedly to improve your muscle strength. The boy asked, "Is that how knights lift heavy stones?" Rosalind replied that it was something like that. When she looked at him, she realized something was wrong. Anton said he injured his spine a few years ago in a carriage incident and has been suffering from lower back pain ever since. The man can walk, but not for too long, and cannot lift anything heavy. Rosalind now realized it was an accident, as she had assumed, but that explained his lack of muscle. If he wasn't careful, he might get hurt again. The girl did not know how she should act in such a case and what to advise him. But at that moment, Anton grabbed her arm and asked, "Is there no way? If he can get rid of the pain for good, he'll do anything for her." Hearing this, the girl was immediately excited. She thought it would be a great opportunity for her if he would really do anything. Then she could change the prince's room and put a new window in it. So Rosalind said they would do it together. But the boy didn't really know what she was talking about. Rosalind explained that he would study with her, and they would be able to get rid of the pain in just a month. Anton was surprised. He couldn't believe if it was true. But the girl promised him, and she herself at this moment thought that His Highness should wait a little longer, for the awakening was on its way. It had been quite some time, and when Rosalind went to him again to give him the medicine, she noticed that he was getting better. She really hoped that Theodore would wake up soon enough to admire the beautiful view outside the window. It would be good for his body and soul. But at that moment, looking out the window, she saw someone standing there. Rosalind immediately recognized it was Archie. She had thought he never left Theodore, but apparently not. Then she looked at His Highness again, and thought that it turned out that they were now alone in the room. Some more time passed, and in the night, Theodore opened his eyes. He was immediately curious as to how long he had been in bed. He wasn't sure, but he felt strangely, even energetic. The boy remembered his mana activating, albeit briefly, but it wasn't enough at all. At that moment, Theodore remembered his father's words, how he said he wasn't trying hard enough, and wasn't his son at all after that. He remembered the despair that had gripped him then as a child. He was treated differently from his younger siblings just because he had failed to awaken his mana. Theodore could neither understand nor forgive him, and he decided to avenge himself in the most disgusting way possible. At that moment, the boy decided for himself that when his father did admit it, he would simply give him his own word back. Namely, we'll say that a man like him can't just be his father, that's all. The guy started to get out of bed and thought that he had absolutely no time to have a sense of hunger. All he needs is an awakening, only an awakening and nothing more. Then Theodore wondered why he had to exist like this. He too wants to live a happy and full life like other people do. And at that moment, he remembered Rosalind's words, namely that she had said that there would be an awakening, and he would live happily ever after. He didn't know if that would really be the case. Did she really believe he could be happy like everyone else? He told himself that it just couldn't be, and then wondered if someone was there, because when he looked toward the door, he saw someone's silhouette. And at that moment, Rosalind appeared. She looked at Theodore, smiled, and said that he was awake. Theodore sat there looking at her. He couldn't say anything. His heart suddenly began to beat hard. But the girl smiled once more and asked, "Didn't the room get brighter?" They moved him to another room while he slept and asked if he liked it. Revealing that she'd said early that the weather was just beautiful that day, she asked if they should walk around a bit after his breakfast. And at that moment, she wondered when the last time someone had smiled so brightly at him. It was just dazzling, but he didn't know if it was because of the sunlight, which he hadn't seen in a long time, or the girl's smile. Then Theodore, after some silence, said that it was quite bright. Rosalind smiled and said that was a very good sign. It meant that they could help him finally wake up. But at that moment, Theodore noticed what looked like handprints on her neck and thought, "Is this bruise really because of him?" And in all this time, it hadn't even gone away a bit. The boy lowered his head and said he was sorry. Rosalind didn't understand what he was talking about. Then Theodore explained that the bruise on her neck, he was sorry he had done it. Well, the girl, as if nothing had happened, smiled and said that everything was fine. She was quite healthy, and he could take it easy. Theodore was very surprised when he heard her say she was healthy. After all, it can't be, because she is so fragile. At that moment, he remembered how he had strangled her and thought that she was very fragile and warm. Then his heart began to beat even harder, and his breathing suddenly slowed. His cheeks suddenly turned red. Rosalind looked at him and was very surprised. She did not understand what was wrong this time. After a while, she brought him tea and told him that their first activity would be to make sure he ate a proper breakfast. Theodore asked what she was talking about. Would this activity, like a proper breakfast, help him wake up? But without waiting for an answer, he said it was all the same. He would go to his study. Rosalind objected and said he should eat a little first. Theodore looked into her confident eyes and wondered if she wasn't afraid of him like everyone else. So he took the food the girl brought and wondered if all he had to do was just eat. Theodore decided that if he finished with this sooner, they could get down to the real activity. So the boy began to eat quickly. Rosalind watched him shoveling food into his mouth and thought he would choke on it. Theodore was very excited, and understandably so. He wants to eat a quick meal so he can start working on waking up. But something made her feel sick. It reminded her of the past. In her past life, the girl worked as a personal trainer. And when she first got a job, her two could survive because no one asked her to be their coach. And in order to overcome all these challenges, she had to put sleepy eating on the back burner. The girl was obsessed with the idea of how to gather more people. Anxiety and impulsiveness plagued her always. When she tried to take a break, she wasn't sure she deserved a rest. Her thoughts kept coming back to her. She wondered if she should give up everything and just live the way she was living. Well, then her boss told her to take her time, because it's normal that she doesn't succeed at everything right away. However, if she has faith, she can overcome everything. To any other person, it might seem like nothing, but it was those words that had comforted the girl then. Looking at Theodore, she wondered if her boss had felt the same way. After that, The girl took a glass of water and walked over to His Highness and replied that nothing would happen if he ate a little slower. Theodore was very surprised and asked what she meant by that. Rosalind smiled and said that it was normal to eat slowly. Awakening is still possible, and she herself at this moment thought that Theodore might not worry, for one day he would bloom as beautifully as the lovely sunflowers. The boy's mother always kept the hope of awakening alive in him, and walking with her in the sunflower garden, he was protected from his father's harsh words and the scornful glances of others. But she left him with her own comfort, and having no purpose in life, Theodore made his way to the imperial garden, which they often visited. At that moment, the boy thought that no one would be saddened by his death. He might as well have been buried under the ground with his mother, because he was a cursed prince and a failure at life. So he thought, and then he saw a small, delicate sunflower that had persevered through the frost. He felt like the sunflower was talking to him. He had the feeling that the sunflower saying that he had done it meant that Theodore would overcome it too. He didn't know if he would experience the awakening, or if anyone would like this sunflower, whether it would ever bloom in the end. At that moment, he plucked it and held it to his chest, thinking that this flower, unlike his mother, would never leave him. Theodore looked at her incredulously and asked if she meant to say that even he could experience the awakening. She was silent for a while. Then she smiled and said that of course he would succeed. She gave him a glass of water and told him she would do her best for him. That's what she was there for. After a while, they went outside, which was beautifully covered with fresh and cold snow. Theodore asked, "Are they having a walk this time?" The girl replied that of course, and asked if the garden wasn't beautiful at this time of year. Rosalind explained that they would need to walk for 30 minutes at least. The boy was very surprised and asked why it took so long, but the girl said it was all for the sake of teaching. Some more time passed. Then Theodore looked at her and asked how long he had left. The girl answered that it was another 25 minutes, but he stood still and asked almost every minute how much longer they had left. Rosalind got angry and said he should have walked at least a little before asking that. Theodore sighed and said so be it. Then they walked a little farther and the girl suddenly suggested. She asked how he would like the idea of them making a snowman. Then the time would pass much faster too. The boy was very surprised and asked how it should even be made. Rosalind realized she had better show him, so she started rolling a snowball and said that this is how you should mold it. Something like this. Let him make it round. Theodore immediately molded a small snowball first, and after that began to roll it on the ground, asking if he was doing it right. The girl replied that he was doing a good job. She explained that in order to make a beautiful snowman, he needed to roll snow. But then she suddenly turned around and was very surprised because Archie wasn't beside them. When she looked to the side, you saw their bodyguard standing near a tree, looking somewhere. She looked closely at the Karcheb ice and noticed that it looked peaceful enough, but she looked at his clothes and wondered if he was cold in this weather. Rosalind thought for a while. Then she called out to His Highness. He was shivering with cold, and she realized that he was too cold. Rosalind immediately went over to him and removed her gloves in order to warm his hands. Theodore was very surprised and asked what she was doing, but then he suddenly felt the warmth that came from the gloves, and she looked at him and asked if that was better. The man could feel the warmth that immediately came from the gloves. It even made him feel good. The girl also helped him by using her power. Rosalind had to experiment a bit with her mana, but she was happy to help him. They stood in silence. Theodore didn't understand why he felt strange all the time when she touched him. He had never felt anything like this towards other people. The man thought maybe it was some kind of spell of hers, but she suddenly felt his hands shaking and asked if he wasn't warm. Theodore turned away from her and replied in a cold voice that it was okay. She could stop. Rosalind was very surprised and asked, "Was it too hot?" He answered that it wasn't and was even a little embarrassed. His cheeks suddenly flushed. The girl, seeing this, said that his face was red. Apparently fever had crept up unnoticed. But Theodore insisted on his point and said that he was really all right. Rosalind thought that maybe he wasn't feeling well but was shy to say so. She was very worried about him. However, His Highness went back to his snowball and continued rolling it because he was really interested in molding this snowman. After a while, the snowball became big enough. Then he turned to the girl and asked if it was enough. Rosalind, seeing the size of the snowball, said that it was even big. She realized that apparently he enjoyed rolling snowballs, but then suddenly Theodore asked, "How much time do we have left?" The girl looked at her watch and said that the 30-minute mark had been passed, and that was the end of the morning lesson. Theodore was very surprised to hear this, because he hadn't even noticed how the remaining time had passed. He asked disappointedly, "Is that really the end of it?" Rosalind was actually quite worried about him, and asked if they could go inside to warm up a bit. She was about to head back to the house when he suddenly stopped and asked that she wait. The girl was very surprised and asked why. Then Theodore pointed to his snowball and said that they should finish. Rosalind realized she had no choice, so she joined His Highness to make sure they finished quickly. The time passed very quickly, and eventually the girl was just finishing rolling the last snowball. They used leaves instead of eyes and a carrot instead of a nose. When it was finished, Rosalind asked him what he would say to it, because it looked just like him. But Theodore was very much surprised and asked in what way. She told him to look at those unusual eyes, for it was very difficult to find them. Then he really looked closely at the snowman's face and was very surprised. Where did she find those leaves? At this point, Rosalind suddenly took off her scarf and began to wrap the snowman with it, saying that he might get cold, so she would cover him. However, at that moment, Theodore suddenly saw some scratches on her neck. He immediately became more serious and said he wanted to go back. Rosalind asked him to wait. They still had to move the snowman closer to the door. If they left it in the middle, the snow would fall all night and just cover it up. At this point, she tried to move him, but she was unsuccessful. Theodore sighed heavily and called out to Archie. His assistant immediately ran up and took the snowman with one hand on his shoulders. It was not difficult for him at all, and the girl was very surprised. She thought about the fact that he was literally a closet, very well trained. Not for nothing, after all, does he have the title of Theodore's guard. Then she wondered if the prince could ever be like him. Theodore, seeing this, asked why she was suddenly looking at him like that. Rosalind replied that she was wondering if he would ever be able to lift a snowman. But the boy wondered and asked why he should do it at all. However, she explained that in that case, the awakening would be much easier. Theodore was immediately interested when he heard the word awakening and asked if it was true. The girl did not immediately understand what he meant. Then the man explained whether it was true that if he picked it up, he could awaken his mana. Rosalind hesitated, and then she said that yes, but she meant that if he got that strong, it would be easier for him. But Theodora did not listen to her. He went to Archie and asked him to put it down, for he would carry it himself. The bodyguard immediately obeyed his order. Then Theodore went over to the snowman and wrapped his arms around it, trying to lift this huge snowman, but he was having no luck. He tried to move it several times, but it was useless. His whole body was shaking, but the snowman wouldn't budge. Rosalind, who was watching all this, thought that it was no good, for he was not able to lift it. Theodore could make himself much worse, and then all her efforts would be useless. Oh, and besides, this whole endeavor is too dangerous, so she immediately ran to him and asked him to stop, because if Theodore did do that, it would be very bad for his back. The girl kept running to his aid, but then suddenly the man couldn't stand the strain, and everything around him went black. The last thing he saw was the girl's disappointed face. After a while, he began to regain consciousness, but he couldn't even move. Archie helped carry His Highness back into the house. As soon as they arrived, they were immediately met by Anton. He looked very worried and asked the girl what had happened in general. Rosalind explained that he had hurt his back. She also asked that they bring him a hot towel and painkillers. The man was lying on the bed. Then Rosalind began to remove his outer clothing. She noticed that, fortunately, his spine was intact, but it looks like he's got a muscle spasm. A massage should, in principle, be enough. Then she suddenly started lifting his shirt and apologized for it. But to fully understand the whole problem, she should still do it, after some time of examination. She said she was going to massage her back. It might hurt a little bit. Theodore was shocked when he heard this. After all, a massage was a rather tactile thing, but he had only decided to avoid any physical contact with her so that no feelings would arise. He immediately said that he didn't need anything and she could be free, because he was fine. But at that moment he suddenly felt a strong pain in his back. Rosalind was worried, so she went to His Highness and asked him to be patient. Just a little, for he would soon feel better. Before she started massaging his back, she suddenly noticed and realized that he was very skinny, all skin and bones. But at that moment, she realized that this was exactly the moment she needed to use mana. She activated her powers and began to slowly rub it into her body. Afterward, she told Theodore to report back if it hurt too much or was too uncomfortable. The man suddenly became very embarrassed. His heart began to beat hard and his breathing slowed down. He thought only of her hands touching his body. Suddenly he felt he couldn't breathe. He told the girl to stop, but Rosalind continued. Then he began to scream and again asked her to stop. The girl was very surprised at his reaction like that, but she quickly removed her hands and asked if everything was okay. Theodore was very annoyed. He asked that she call Anton and tell him to get some poppy milk for him right away. Rosalind replied that she would do it right away. Then she started to leave and thought it was just a massage. He didn't need anesthesia, or he was just exaggerating. The man, who remained lying like that, suddenly thought about all this and realized that he had enjoyed those touches after all. He felt like his heart was about to burn with all these emotions. Theodore didn't want all of this, because he knew it wouldn't end well, that was for sure. Some more time passed, and Rosalind helped Anton, as promised, doing gymnastics with him. The man was standing in a very interesting pose. Then she said that it was coming out all right. Now have him inhale, put his foot down, and then raise his other foot and arm. When Anton repeated all this, he asked if it was all too simple for a full-fledged workout. But the girl explained that it should be done 10 times on each side in this way. Let him also make sure that his back was straight. This exercise is actually called bird dog. For rehabilitation, it needs strength training that does not weigh down the body, and on the contrary, strengthens the muscles. The bird dog exercise is a simple exercise to strengthen the abs and lower back muscles without putting stress on the spine. In fact, Anton says it so boldly only because he has only done it a few times. Bird dog can be a very difficult exercise, and not everyone can handle it. After a while, the man sat down on the floor and said he was ready. But then Rosalind smiled and answered that the second approach would last 15 seconds. Anton, hearing this, was very surprised. He asked if some kind of second approach was really needed. The girl replied that of course he was doing a great job, so don't let him give up so easily. When Anton finished his exercises, he fell exhaustedly to the floor. He couldn't even move a finger. Rosalind smiled and replied that he was doing an excellent job. It was very promising, especially since it was his first time doing it regularly, and the pain would immediately disappear. But the man ignored her words. He was too tired to argue with her. The girl suddenly said that she had wanted to ask him something for a long time. When the boy asked what about, the girl wondered if they could bring more variety to His Highness's diet. Anton, hearing this, was very surprised. But Rosalind said she wondered if she could include not only bread, but also meat and nuts in her diet to add more nutrients. Then the butler hesitated at her suggestion. The girl suddenly became nervous and asked if something was wrong. Anton explained that their budget was rather limited. At this point, Rosalind wondered how much money the palace even allocates to the Psy folk, and then wondered if they couldn't even do it once a week. But then they could spend less on her meals. However, Anton objected and said that was out of the question. It's not like they can't spare her. He also said that he would sort it all out. After their conversation, the girl went for a little walk, and as she passed the window, she saw a snowman. In fact, she wondered what Anton was thinking now, but she pushed those thoughts away from her as soon as she saw their creation. The girl immediately went outside and thought he looked rather lonely. In fact, this snowman reminded her of Theodore, who was all alone, and her being left alone in another universe. Rosalind thought about the loneliness she felt. But that wasn't surprising. In fact, it meant that she felt more relaxed now. Then she started to put on her gloves and thought she should get to work already. After that, the girl started molding a small snowball, and soon she had one that was quite large. In fact, Rosalind really wanted to make a family for the snowman. Then he wouldn't be so lonely standing outside all the time. And at that moment, the girl suddenly heard some noise behind her. She immediately turned around to see what was there, but saw nothing. Rosalind returned to her work, but the noise kept her from concentrating. She looked around and noticed that the noise was coming from the tree. It was just the tree that Archie was always standing near. She walked over to it and looked out. Rosalind thought he might still be there, but there was no one there. The girl was about to leave when suddenly she heard someone meowing. When she looked down, she saw a cat lying in the snow. Rosalind looked at him carefully and thought that he was very poor because he was hurt. Indeed, the cat had a scratch on his eye. She wanted to help him. Then the girl moved closer. The cat didn't move, it wasn't going to run away, and she activated her ability for healing. And so, after some time, she had already finished her ritual, then reached out her hand to the kitten and said that everything was fine. He could take it easy. Rosalind wanted to pet it. She was actually afraid that the cat wouldn't like it and would bite her. But in fact, all went well, and she calmly stroked the kitten, who even purred with pleasure. Then the cat turned around and started to walk away. And in fact, Rosalind didn't even know that all folk existed cat. She sat staring at him for a while, then remembered that she had to get her work done soon. After that, the girl went back to her work and built another snowman, which she placed next to their first one. As she looked at her creation, she smiled and thought that now their snowman wouldn't be lonely. He would always have a friend to talk to. However, at that moment she suddenly heard a strange growl. It was coming from her stomach. The girl had been hungry all this time. Then the girl returned to the manor, and when she entered the kitchen, she immediately saw a cooked chicken. Because of that, she was very surprised. Rosalind thought maybe it was some kind of wild pigeon. How did he even manage to catch it so quickly? The girl started eating, and she really liked it because it was amazing, eating protein after such a long time. At this time, Archie also returned to the manor and thought it was all very silly. It had been a long time since he had returned to his original body, but still he must have lost all fear. Once he walked into a hunter's trap. Actually, it was very stupid of him. Since he had miscalculated so much, in this empire cats are considered evil and cursed. And he wouldn't have done it at all if it hadn't been for Anton's request. By that time, Archie had already come to His Highness, who was lying peacefully asleep in his bed, for he had sworn and would do anything for him. Then he remembered their first meeting. He was in the body of a cat, frozen and battered. Theodore was passing by, and when he saw the cat lying unconscious, he immediately picked him up and wrapped him in a blanket, saying at the same time that he was a damned werewolf cat, just like him. Archie remembered all this, and suddenly felt sad. In fact, Theodore was a very precious person to him. At this moment, he took and covered His Highness to keep him warm. It had been a few days, and Anton, seeing Rosalind, said that he seemed to have put on a little weight, and it was probably all due to proper dieting. The girl thinks that from this day forward, she can finally start a little stretch with him. Then she came to his room, carrying his lunch in her hands. But then suddenly the door wouldn't open. Then she tried again and realized that it was locked. The girl asked in surprise, "What's going on?" Theodore replied that he wasn't hungry today. The girl realized that he sounded very upset and asked what was wrong. Did he have something wrong? Or maybe something hurts? But then suddenly she remembered and thought, could it be because of that one? Rosalind realized that it was March and she shouldn't have left him alone. Then the girl turned to him again, but Theodore had already raised his voice and shouted for her to leave. The girl asked, did he really receive an invitation from the palace? For a while they said nothing to each other, but then Rosalind heard the door open. Theodore emerged from it. He looked upset and asked how she knew about it. The girl looked closely at his face and realized he was crying, and she herself replied that celebrating Prince Kyle's birthday was a great event in itself. Kylie von Barbarossa is Theodora's half-brother and also the crown prince of the empire who specifically invited him to his birthday party. During the week, Theodore was constantly bullied, which only reinforced his hatred for his kin. The girl handed him the food and thought that he would go there again this year. You can't refuse an order from a powerful prince. In fact, to be frank, Kyle was partially responsible for Theodore's obnoxious temper. He was always annoyed with him, knowing that he felt weaker. Kyle was constantly trying to humiliate and hurt him somehow, even after growing up, as if he couldn't stand Theodore's happiness. But at this moment, Rosalind realized that this was a super opportunity for them because an imperial healer must have a lot of medicines, and with their help, she would be able to help Theodore regain his health. If only there was a way to get a medicine that strengthened stamina and muscles, that would be wonderful. In that case, the awakening would be quicker, and Rosalind would be safe and sound. When she thought of all this, she turned to His Highness and told him not to be upset. She also added that she would be happy to accompany him to the event. Theodore, hearing this, was very surprised. Then the girl replied that she was his mentor after all, and they couldn't skip classes because then it would all be useless. The man thought about all that, but then said that it probably wouldn't be so bad after all. Rosalind rejoiced and said that of course, after he finished the trapeze, let him come to the ballroom. Theodore was surprised and asked why he should come to the ballroom. The girl replied that it was time for his body to melt. They met again, but already in the ballroom. Theodore didn't feel very comfortable because he wasn't going to be with the girl for so long. But Rosalind suddenly walked around to the other side of him and touched his waist, saying she would help him with his posture. The man started to resist and said that everything was fine and he didn't need help. But the girl at that moment started touching and changing his posture. And then Theodore felt that strange feeling again. His heart began to beat hard again, and his breathing slowed. The girl continued to straighten his posture, but then suddenly he couldn't take it anymore and turned away from her and asked her to stop. Rosalind was a little confused at first. She didn't understand what this reaction was, but then she said that a little more and he'd be all right. Theodore didn't listen to her words any further. He looked at her beautiful neck and thought only that he wanted to touch her very badly. He got very embarrassed, and Rosalind kept saying that if he didn't warm up his body properly, he would suffer even more the next day. There would be sore muscles and generally unpleasant sensations. But all the man could think about was that he wanted to touch her very badly. Is he really going crazy? Why is he feeling this kind of desire? This had never happened to him before. Then he interrupted her and in a shaky voice told her not to touch her. He could handle everything himself. Rosalind was very surprised and asked what he meant, but the man asked that she just explain to him what to do and he would repeat it himself without touching. The girl didn't fully understand what was happening. But then she told him to interlock his fingers, raise his hands with palms up, and bend to the side. Theodore began to follow her words and bend. Rosalind was in pain. She watched it, and she already wanted to go over to him and help him, but he firmly replied that he had already said no touching, hadn't he? The girl was about to say that it was much safer to have someone supportive, but he told her to get behind him or he would just leave. And the girl obeyed his request. After a while, he could hardly breathe. Rosalind decided that he'd had enough and told him that their training was over for the day. Then she realized that his body was a total chaos. She should make him do more of the various stretches to train him, and also her main goal will be that she will find a cure in the palace after consulting a specialist and help him heal. Anton came to her afterward, and the girl carefully told him not to skip practice just because she wasn't at the manor. The man smiled and said that there was no way he would do that. After all, he was getting better from the exercise, so she didn't have to worry about that. But Rosalind insisted and said that if he ever needed anything, just let her know. And after that, she asked if he had worked in the palace all his life. The man replied that he had, and she asked then he must know where the healer was. Anton was very surprised and said that of course he knew, but he didn't understand why she suddenly started asking about it so much. Rosalind replied that she suddenly wondered if there was any medicine that could improve His Highness's health. Anton replied that he understood, but that she had to be careful because there were a huge number of different means. Then he took out a piece of paper and said he would mark the location for her. But the girl said it would be very nice if he could go with her. Anton said that he had a long time to stay on the estate and protect this house. Then he suddenly became very shy and, apologizing, asked if he could inquire about her body parameters. Rosalind suddenly became wary and asked why he wanted to know. Anton replied that she would probably need a dress for the event, so he would order one. The girl replied that it wasn't that important. It was fine, she could go in her own. After all, she's something of a tutor and can't imagine herself in a beautifully flowing dress that will shine in the sun with its beauty. Yes, the man replied that in that case, since she didn't have any preferences, he would order whatever seemed appropriate to him. The girl thanked him for that, and after that, she headed for the door, deciding to take a little walk. As she walked outside, the girl had only one thing on her mind. She wished very much that the cat she had met on her last walk was also there. When she walked forward a bit, she immediately saw that black cat with a scratch on his eye. He was sleeping peacefully in the snow. Rosalind slowly approached him and told him not to run away. It was she, after all, and also, pulling from her pocket, added that she had a little present for him. The cat, hearing her name, immediately woke up. And when she pulled out a sprig of flower, he was immediately happy at the sight of it. And all because it wasn't a simple twig with flowers, it was catnip. He knows cats love that stuff. She played with him for a while. Afterwards, smiling, she asked if she could hug him. The cat purred happily in response, as if understanding her. She took him in her arms and continued to play. For a while, the cat enjoyed being in her arms. After that, it immediately started to run away. Rosalind was very surprised because it happened very quickly. A few more days went by like that. At last the moment came when Theodore had to go to the palace. Of course, he was accompanied by Archie and Rosalind. When they entered the carriage that was to take them to the royal palace, the girl sat next to Archie, while His Highness sat alone. At this point, she thought, the parlor was very crowded, and the prince was still very caught up in waking up. And Archie had been weird lately. She glanced at him then and noticed that he was looking at her too. However, the man immediately turned away from her and looked out the window. Rosalind was very surprised to see him look away first. After that, the girl turned to His Highness and, smiling, asked if they were on their way to the capital. Theodore replied that of course they were on their way. She said she was excited and thought about how she wanted to see the damn emperor at least once. So it's all good, she's even excited, you could say. However, soon the girl's expectations were completely shattered, and she was simply lost, not knowing what to do now. But meanwhile, they were still traveling through the dense forest on the outskirts of Merk's capital city. Rosalind looked out the window and immediately realized that as soon as they got out of the forest, they would immediately arrive in the capital. The last 5 days haven't been easy, but she's glad everyone's safe and sound after that. And the prince is still the same. In fact, she had high hopes for a happy ending to this exciting journey. She looked out the window again, however, and realized that the forest was suspiciously quiet. Archie just sat there, sighing heavily, looking out the window. But then suddenly the girl heard a strange screeching sound. It was an arrow, which was flying straight at her with incredible speed. Archie reacted just in time to throw her and Theodore to the floor. Then he said it was an assault. Everyone was in shock. They didn't understand what to do or why this was even happening. Rosalind. This surprised her the most, because she didn't understand how someone could attack a carriage with the imperial coat of arms in the first place. She told His Highness that Archie would take care of it. Everything would be fine, and he didn't have to worry. But at that moment, she heard a strange sound like a roar. After that, the girl immediately went to the window and looked out of it. Then she saw Archie fighting some green-colored creature with huge ears. Rosalind took a closer look and realized that he looked a lot like a goblin, but she didn't understand why exactly now there was an attack by the foul creature. They sat back in their seats, and the girl thought Archie was out, which meant it would soon be over and everything would be fine. Theodore, who was still lying on the floor, looked at the girl fearfully and asked what it could all mean. Rosalind said that they were attacked by goblins, The man was very angry when he heard this, and asked how it could have happened that they were attacked by goblins. He even began to shake with anger. The girl, noticing this, realized that it was very dangerous. After all, if his emotions intensified, the mana might even explode. She too began to tremble with fear because she didn't want to die. The girl turned to His Highness and asked him to calm down because Archie was fighting there and it would soon be over. However, at that moment their wagon suddenly began to shake violently, and the girl fell to the floor again. All this was happening because the other goblins with their clubs started jumping on it, loosening it even more. Rosalind and Theodore were very close to each other because of the tremors. Then she, concerned, asked if he was all right. The man became very uncomfortable. His heart began to race again, and the girl insisted on an answer. She asked him to answer or she would be angry. Theodore realized that his heart was racing. He was even in pain. He really wanted to touch her. The man couldn't believe that these feelings had reappeared, and at such a moment. He suddenly moved away from her a little, but was still close enough, and looked her straight in the eyes. Then Theodore finally answered her questions and told her that she was fine. When the girl was about to say something, she suddenly heard some sort of growling, and she quickly flipped it to the other side. When Rosalind looked back, she saw that the face of a goblin had appeared in the gap created by the violent impact and was snarling. Both she and Theodore were very scared, but she couldn't believe that she would die after all she had done to survive. But she did not despair. The girl realized that she had to think, for there must be some way in such a small carriage. It would be impossible to fight like Archie. If she used her mana to hit the goblin's vital points, she could buy time before Archie returned. The girl was left with no choice, so she decided to give it a try. The goblin had already snuck into the wagon itself and was threatening her with a club, but the girl had activated her superpowers and was ready to fight. She didn't wait for him to deliver his blow and hit him straight in the face, causing him to cringe. However, at that moment, she was so engrossed in that goblin that she didn't notice another one sneaking up behind her and hitting her in the head with a club. Theodore, seeing this, was horrified. He immediately shouted her name, but he had no time to warn her of the danger, for the goblin struck her on the head. The guy thought he was going to take it and kill it. He wants to kill this monster that hurt Rosalind. And at that moment, everything around him suddenly began to glow brightly. He looked at the goblin carefully and thought that he had a weak, vile consciousness. How dare he even dare to hurt a girl? The goblin was not intimidated. The monster was determined to win this fight, and he wasn't going to back down anywhere. However, at this moment, Theodore suddenly raised his hand and started using his abilities. He decided to get closer to the goblin. However, as soon as he stepped in one step, he immediately fell down exhausted. He was too weak for all this. The goblin, seeing this, immediately rejoiced at his victory. He roared and raised his club up, swinging it up to strike. But he didn't have time to do anything because the goblin wasn't off his ninja's feet. Theodore looked at him and said that he was fine, even normal, but that Rosalind was not good for her. Then the guy went to her body, and after seeing her condition, he immediately told her to hurry up and find an herb that could stop the bleeding. He leaned over her breathless body and thought that he couldn't bear it if he never saw her smile again. What would it really be like if he could never see her smile sweetly? Then he clamped down on that wound that was bleeding. At that moment, Archie took the form of a cat and immediately ran to fetch the healing herb. Soon he returned and brought it to Theodore. Theodore immediately took this healing herb and applied it to the wound that was bleeding. The girl continued to lie unconscious.